When a loved one passes, the last thing that you should have to worry about is what legal concerns that you may have regarding the funeral. Federal and state laws have been enacted to protect families, but many people have no idea what to look out for. So today, Lexington attorney Gina Ghioldi is here to make sure that you know what your legal rights are. Gina, what do we need to know?
Well, first and foremost, the time to familiarize yourself with the laws regarding funeral homes really is not at the time that somebody passes. It's beforehand. There have been a lot of federal and state laws enacted, like you said, to protect consumers, and that's exactly what you are. You're a consumer when you're actually going and sitting down with a funeral director and trying to plan out the arrangements that you need for a loved one.
What are they obligated to do?
Well, first of all, at the time that they start discussing what type of arrangements that you may want, they have to disclose an itemized price list. That means that you need to know exactly what the services or the goods are that they're providing, and they have to tell you exactly what the price is for those things. So you're making a conscious, informed decision at the time that you're making the purchases. It's called the funeral rule, and some people have heard of it, but many people don't realize it's very regulated.
So do people, they need to know what they're obligated to buy and everything, like for instance like a casket?
That's correct. I mean, there are actually specific service fees that everybody has to purchase because you're hiring the funeral home to help you. But after that, you really do have a choice, and one of those things is with regards to a casket. Now, many people feel that regardless of whether you are burying somebody or there's going to be cremation, I know it's a hard topic, but we have to address it, is that you have to have a casket, and that's not the case. You always could rent a casket rather than buy one if you're not going to have a burial. And also, many people think that they have to buy the casket through the funeral home. And that's just not the case. You actually can bring in your own casket that you've purchased separately, and the funeral director has to accept it. You can buy caskets on eBay.
On eBay?
On eBay. So believe it or not, you can shop around, and caskets can cost between $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, even more. So unfortunately, it's one of those products that you may not want to research, but it can make a big difference because many of them don't really do anything better in terms of the more expensive ones versus the less expensive ones.
So you were saying about cremation, what if there is no burial, then what?
Well, in fact, then there may not need to be embalming. That's another thing that we need to talk about. And in reality, embalming is not mandated by law except in certain circumstances. So a funeral director has to get your permission to actually do the embalming. There's a cost, of course, involved with that. So they have to ask your permission, and you have to give express permission to actually do the embalming, except in certain circumstances. And if a funeral director says, listen, you have to have embalming, or you have to have this service or that service, ask them why. Don't be afraid to ask.
How do you know that the funeral director is doing what you want him to do?
Well, that's why you need to familiarize yourself with the laws ahead of time, if at all possible. And even if it's a sudden issue and a sudden matter that you have to take care of, take those couple of minutes to go and familiarize yourself with the laws. There are wonderful funeral directors out there who are doing an invaluable service to families who are in need. But unfortunately, there are an unsavory few, like in any profession, and you have to be careful. So ask a lot of questions. With that price list that we were talking about a minute ago, they have to actually provide that to you in writing, and you have a right to take it with you, so you can shop around.
What if people are, they're so upset about the death, I mean, they can't think straight.
Right.
What do you suggest they do? How do they deal with this kind of stuff?
I think the best thing to do is to bring in a friend or an acquaintance who is more rational, who isn't as emotionally involved, and have them maybe accompany you right into the funeral director and ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be led into, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. It's just not the case. And there are many laws that are enacted, like I said, to protect you. But unless you know what they are, you're not going to know if the funeral director is following them or not.
How do you know if a funeral home is a good, respectable, decent funeral home? How do you find that?
Well, you can first of all go to the state and make sure that their license is in good standing. That's very important. I would also ask for referrals. It's very important to really familiarize yourself with a funeral home before you might need one. But if you don't and something suddenly happens and you're not prepared, then ask some local business people in the area. Ask some clergy. Ask people who you trust their opinion, who can hopefully attest to that funeral director and the people who work there.
But I tell you, my mother's 75 and I don't even want to talk about that stuff with her.
It's
I know you're supposed to, but
hard,
it's so difficult. I don't even want to deal with that.
It is very difficult, and there's a whole other topic which we can get into next week, and that is prepaid funeral arrangement. There are a lot of legalities with that, and you have to be very careful, but it's something good to think about.
Okay, Gina, thanks for joining us. Well, let's talk about your website again. What is
It's www.ghioldilaw.com, and I have more information there on this topic, and you'll see some specific things that funeral directors can and can't do, so you can familiarize yourself with some of those laws we talked about.
Great. Thanks, Gina. See you next
Thanks.
week. A reminder, you can see all of the day's news and streaming video on our website. Just go to NECN.com or the NECN pages of Boston.com, the online home of the Boston Globe.
Now